Welcome to the Streets.mn podcast, the show where we highlight how transportation and land use can make our communities better places. Coming to you from beautiful Seward, Minneapolis, Minnesota, I am your host, Ian R. Buck. The state legislative session got off to a rocky start this year, but we are in the thick of it now. Yes, that's right, it's time for our hotly awaited episode covering the legislative agendas of the awesome urbanist organizations that we have here in our state. First up, to cover housing and land use, we have Lincoln Wells, volunteer at Neighbors for More Neighbors, and Yvan Roberts, representing the Minnesota Zoning Atlas. This has been a weird Minnesota State session so far. And I have been peripherally paying attention, but it's been a weird semester for me, so I don't have all the details. And Yvan, you had quite the summary for us here.
I can give you a quick summary. Basically, the summary is that both legislative chambers were tied in some form. Will become, the Senate has become untied with the election of Doran Clark to the one of the Minneapolis Senate districts. The State House is temporarily in sort of Republican control because there's a DFL seat, which the member was ruled ineligible because he lived out of district. And so the expectation is it will become a tie in a special election in March. And so the House had to negotiate a sort of a power sharing agreement, knowing that the session was going to be essentially tied for most of the session. So it was kind of a chaotic start, but right. Essentially that's the short version.
So the Senate seat that had to go through a special election that got resolved within a couple of weeks of the start of the session, right?
A month of it was a month between Kerry Diedrich passing and then the special election.
Yeah. But March, like what is the total length of the session? Like how far into the session is March?
I think they, if I remember rightly, they have a certain number of legislative days, which they can sit in a biennium. And so the later they start, the later they can go. But generally, Minnesota legislative sessions go into May sometime, a week or so before Memorial Day. So they have a very firm deadline in the state constitution to do things.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
It's not like at school when we have too many snow days and then we have to go farther into the summer.
It's more similar than you'd think. Yeah. I mean, they do. They can't. Yeah. It's actually a really good analogy.
All right, so let's get into those legislative priorities that we have. What's going on in housing? We won some stuff recently. We had some goals from last year that were laid over. So what are kind of the big ticket items that we're looking at?
Yeah, from Neighbors for More Neighbors perspective, we have a couple of different legislative priorities that we'll be pushing this session. We're working in coalition, what we call the Yes to Homes Coalition, which is a group of organizations, some focused on housing specifically, like us and Habitat for Humanity, and then others that just have housing as an interest from either their members or for specific concerns. Organizations like Isaiah, which is a faith-based organization, and Sierra Club, which is obviously concerned about housing due to the environmental impacts of urban sprawl. So together, the coalition has a group of legislative priorities that's mostly about increasing the abundance of housing types that are allowed within the cities and trying to reduce some of the barriers that developers and home builders face in Minnesota. Outside of the coalition, Neighbors is also pushing for legislation around land value tax, which we can also get into later if you'd like.
Yeah, that's actually one that I've seen some stuff about very, very recently that like it went through committee and it might be included in an omnibus in the near future.
Yeah, so there's strong support for land value tax in the House right now, and yes, so it's been introduced and it is working its way through its process. We're still looking for strong champions for the bill in the Senate Tax Committee. But yeah, there's like strong indications that this could be moving forward in Minnesota.
Ooh, that's exciting.
And to tie it back to last year's session, one of the sort of the housing related bills that did pass last session was clarifying the sort of a conflict between the Minnesota Environmental Practices Act and the Metropolitan Land Planning Act.
Yes.
This got discussed in terms of like a lawsuit against Minneapolis for the Minneapolis 2040 plan, but the issue was really broader than that. And so this was something which was supported both by the League of Minnesota Cities, who were opposing exert sort of more state control of local land use decisions, or what are decisions made at the local level now. And so since that, you've seen a couple of cities, St. Louis Park is one of them, most notably sort of like release proposals for allowing different types of housing, revising essentially their zoning code. There's 186 cities in the 7-county metro, and so if it's done one city at a time, it'll take a really long time for cities to change zoning in the way that advocates like neighbors have been doing, and so that's why there's this pressure for state legislation, because we've got just such a diversity of what's allowed, where you can build what, very hard to navigate for builders and for people just like looking to build a home.
Yeah. So let's get into the real juicy details here. Like, what kinds of, are we talking about? Broad upzoning across the state, missing middle housing, all those buzzwords?
Yeah, so I would say that we're kind of looking at making progress across the spectrum. There are things that could be implemented across Minnesota that would increase the housing supply. We really like to frame this in that we need to legalize more starter home options for individuals who are first entering the housing market. These could be things like ADUs, or like cottage homes, as some people know them by, or in-law suites, townhouses, duplexes. So a good option for almost every residential parcel of land within the state. Yeah, and it's really important to try to bring down the first time homebuyer costs, so that people are able to enter the market for homes if they're looking to buy.
So what are the mechanisms that we're targeting here? Are we talking just allowing more units per parcel? Are we talking like increasing the floor to area ratios that are allowed? Are we pairing all these things together?
Yeah, so things like floor to area ratio, like lot setbacks, things like that, what are typically referred to as bulk controls, are ways that municipalities can prevent the building of these types of homes. I will definitely be talking about those for some of the other legislative priorities that we have. For the starter homes, a lot of this comes down to how many dwellings can be on a single parcel of land. The ideal number across the entire state would be at least 2. So you would think of a typical home and an ADU or a duplex, and then allowing like lot splitting on parcels that already exist or newly developed home parcels for the creation of townhomes.
Yeah. And just to sort of set the context with our work on the Minnesota Zoning Atlas, the average city in the metro area, they kind of stock most common area rules for building a home is you need about 10,000 square feet of land. And for listeners in Minneapolis and St. Paul, that's sort of twice your kind of average in the two inner cities. The evidence from a lot of cities is that people don't necessarily want that size of lot, and so what we see in Minnesota cities in the metro area is a large-scale use of what's called a planned unit development. Most cities have a provision in their code for how this gets done, and it's essentially like a developer has to come with a proposal, and they can negotiate planning approvals for a large number of homes with the city, and sort of starting with the zoning code as a sort of a template. In that process, and it's a little opaque, because it's done sort of in private, developers are often pushing for smaller lots. And you can sort of see this if you drive out into the suburbs, that you're not seeing new developments have 10,000 square feet. The homes are on smaller lots. They're kind of making that up by having a lot of common area, sort of, like a park that's kind of owned in common, lots of driveway space. So the city is maintaining that overall level of density control of like 1/4 of an acre per parcel. But the actual amount that a homeowner has to look after is probably closer to your Minneapolis lot than to the sort of the 10,000. What happens with all that extra land? Some of it becomes, like it's a wetland or it's a field where kids play or whatever. But a lot of it needs to be kind of managed. And so you see cities pushing these new housing into homeowners associations, manage that space and the grounds and the mowing and the plowing of the sidewalks and what have you. And that is also like an issue which is coming up, is the role of these homeowners associations in new housing developments. The direction of the legislation is to say that cities cannot require as a condition of approving a development that you have to have a homeowners association. Our project with the Minnesota Zoning Atlas in the second year, 25-26, so starting in the summer, we'll be sort of working on model zoning code that cities could adopt to allow townhouses as infill, replacing 2 or 3 single family homes that might have fallen into disrepair. You can put 10 to 12 townhouses in that space incrementally. Cities have generally not planned for how do we do infill. A lot of cities zoning is really about like, okay, we've got 100 acres here and we're dividing it up, and how do we divide it up? They have not made it easy to do infill. Now,
Lincoln, on the topic of allowing people to like split up lots into multiple different smaller lots, that makes me think about rural contexts as well. Is the legislation that we're pursuing, is that targeting only like incorporated cities in Minnesota, or would that apply in like unincorporated, county jurisdiction areas?
Yeah, I think this is a really underappreciated aspect of housing work. When people think about infill, missing middle, they're usually thinking about large cities. The work that we're thinking about with like what we're talking about again with these starter homes. So this is like having 2 dwellings on any residential parcel within Minnesota. The thought process would be that would be for any current like housing parcel. So that would include like rural regions as well. This is a piece of legislation that we think could apply to pretty much any housing parcel within the state.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because one of the goals of good urbanism, right, is that like we build densely in our population centers so that we don't have to spread out. You mentioned Sierra Club's concern with urban sprawl, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and one of the things that I have come to appreciate recently is that like there are counties in the metro area where they have incorporated cities, and those have to do their comprehensive plans and plan for more density and everything, but the county itself, outside of those cities, they are able to keep density very low, and specifically say like, oh, you can only have so many housing units per, like per quarter of a township kind of thing. And I see that as a very positive thing because, like we want to be able to keep the low density areas low density,
Yes.
for farming or for, public recreation, for, like uses that are good outside of cities.
Yeah, and especially like as like the U.S. farming population also ages, like a lot of those people, they live in their farmhouse. They want to leave that to a child who will be taking over the farmstead, but they don't necessarily want to leave the property where they've lived their entire life. Allowing things like accessory dwelling units on a farm homestead like that could be a really like viable option for people as they kind of age out of these larger farmhouses into like smaller units.
Yeah, and this is like a very predominant pattern that on a farm you can have one house, and it's the rule came. It's important to be clear. It came for good reasons, like concerns about sewer, things like that. They're trying to limit this sort of silly sprawl. But it really is a barrier to sort of multi-generational families when you want two houses, as Lincoln says. In the metro area where we do have land which is designated for agricultural purposes in some of the counties, Hmong families have been sort of affected by this. They want to, there's people who are not multi-generational, but essentially siblings or cousins who want to farm the same piece of land and have two, what we think of as two farmhouses. But that's not allowed. And so the issue, comes up in a slightly different way in rural areas, but essentially it's the same. It's the same one.
Interesting. Yeah. Thanks for that context.
The next level of increase in density that you can think about would be increasing up to triplexes or quadplexes in very specific regions across the state. Something that we've been considering or looking at within Minnesota is the state of Minnesota actually provides about $200 million to local municipalities every year for the maintenance and repaving of what are called municipal state aid streets. These are streets that the municipalities have deemed of high importance, and the state helps them either create these roads or manage them. Something we've been thinking about is making sure that if the state is providing this funding to municipalities, that there is good land use around these streets. So one of our legislative priorities would be to kind of evaluate these MSA streets, which are located in about 150 cities across Minnesota, and try to allow higher density around these streets, whether it be triplexes or quadplexes. So we're kind of moving up in the density ladder, but trying to target it to very specific locations where the state is putting investment anyway.
Now, the state aid roads, the funding source comes with a requirement that the municipalities have to build them to certain standards. As I understand it, makes a lot of these state aid roads some of the more dangerous ones for pedestrians because they have wider lanes, feels like drivers can go faster. Are we putting ourselves in a position where we're trying to make a lot of people live in high density housing right next to some of the most dangerous streets in the state?
This would not just be on the municipal state aid streets, but in a sort of a buffer around them. So it would extend into what we in Minneapolis sort of interior streets, and so in that way sort of capture more of the land area, more of the residential land than just along the streets. I think is a sort of in the context of North American planning, a pretty important innovation, because it does get us away from that model of if you want to have anything other than a single family home, essentially you're going to be on a major street.
Right. So what were some of the specific numbers for what kind of density we're targeting near state aid roads?
So we'd be thinking triplexes and quadplexes, within a certain buffer distance. And, this is obviously something that's going to have to be negotiated out within the legislative process. Obviously, we would like to see the buffers go out as far as possible, up to a quarter mile.
Any other big items?
Yeah, so the last big one I guess we can talk about is legalizing homes near destinations is kind of what we're referring to, how we're referring to the bill. And This would really be legalizing residential housing options within commercial areas. So most folks, they want to be able to live near amenities that makes their home worth living in. Things like grocery stores and coffee shops and gyms, hardware stores. The way that the current zoning is structured really segregates residential housing from these commercial centers that people want to live by. So we will definitely be pushing legislation looking to allow commercial or residential housing to be built in commercial zones. The typical example that most people think about something like this would be a 5/1. So yeah, that's kind of the last main piece of legislation, as well as there's going to be some smaller bills as well that will make the building of homes easier, hopefully. Things like limiting municipalities from setting aesthetic standards that make it harder to build housing. Things like we will also be supporting the People Over Parking Act, which will remove residential parking mandates across the state, which is something that has already occurred here in St. Paul and Minneapolis. And some another small bill will be regarding clarifying some liability issues for condo builders. If you have any background knowledge in this, like condos are harder to build in Minnesota, and there haven't been many built in the past few decades. And part of the reason why is due to there's some clarity that needs to be addressed within the liability that builders face when they're trying to build, finance, and insure these like condo buildings. So those are the main.
That sounds like something that could be an entire episode all on its own.
Yeah.
Like liability law. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah. The last one is really just land value tax, which I know you've previously covered, Ian, in a couple of podcasts. This is just going to be the last priority that former neighbors will also be pushing, which will just be to allow for municipalities to restructure their property tax scheme to try to incentivize development on vacant lots, things like parking lots or undeveloped land within their jurisdiction, to hopefully provide more incentive for the landowner to develop the land rather than sit on it as like a land speculation.
Yeah. Is this current legislation like a pilot program kind of thing still, or have we moved past that? Are we just like, is the current legislation kind of allowing municipalities everywhere to do this?
So the current language would allow municipalities to go forth.
All right. Lincoln, Ivan, thanks for coming on the show.
Yep. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
Next, we've caught up with Peter Wagenius, Legislative Director at Sierra Club North Star Chapter, after the Transit Equity Day celebration.
Yeah, our big top takeaways for 2025 is that we have to play defense. I wish that were true, but we have to play a lot of defense. Sierra Club is part of the Yes to Homes Land Use Reform Coalition, and we're not stopping our advocacy for land use reforms, but we're trying to do that simultaneously with playing defense to protect our biggest wins from 2023.
Right.
And
which would be like the 3/4 cent sales tax for transit. Any other major ones from 2023 that were still?
The 3/4 cent Metro-wide sales tax for transit, and let me just spell that out a little bit more. For transit, walking, and biking,
yes,
all of the above, because they're all threatened, is probably the biggest one. And I can speak to why that's the biggest threat, but let me just identify a couple of the others. Another big victory from 2023 was the climate impact of highways law. And as a matter of fact, earlier this evening, we heard from Larry Kraft, who was the lead author of that law, and Katie Jones, new state representative, who worked with Representative Kraft as an outside advocate to pass that law. That's a piece of policy that is really important to constrain vehicle miles traveled. And just so your viewers understand what that bill did, is it said to MnDOT, you cannot build projects that will exceed our greenhouse gas reduction targets or our vehicle miles traveled reduction targets. We're the first state in the nation to have a climate impact of laws that uses both of those.
Okay.
Colorado has done one. I think we're the second, but we're the only one that has said you have to meet a greenhouse gas reduction target and a vehicle miles traveled reduction target.
Right.
That's really important because we're trying to get people to obey a law they don't necessarily want to obey. So it's kind of a belt and suspenders thing. You really want to constrain them. And what it says is if they, and we have a greenhouse gas reduction target goal now, 20% VMT reduction target. And if they're going to
20% by when?
I think it's 2040.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's 20% per capita, which is not what we wanted. We wanted 20% in absolute terms.
Yeah.
Still, it's still a big deal. To get any state DOT to be required to meet a VMT reduction target is a big deal. And a crucial part of that is that with any individual project, they either have to adjust the project to make it not exceed VMT reduction goals, or they have to pair it with other projects that will, or they have to cancel it. It's a great law. But over the long term, are we going to actually be able to enforce that law if MnDOT doesn't have the ability to use their dollars on good things? I think a lot of people would like to believe that MnDOT has categories of projects. Projects that are good for the climate and projects that are bad for the climate. And I hate to break it to you, but for the most part, they have two types of projects. Projects that keep the number of lanes, which is to say they perpetuate emissions, or they increase the number of lanes, which is to say they make it worse.
Yep.
We actually have to make it legal for them to obey the law. We have to make it legal for them to do good things. So we're trying to lay the groundwork for MnDOT to have the flexibility to use their dollars on good things. Like, for example, highway bus rapid transit on highways.
Yeah.
That's an obvious one. It's clearly constitutional. And so that's something we're trying to work on.
And you're talking about MnDOT being able to use money for that, because currently all of our highway BRT stuff has been like Metro Transit led.
That's right.
But if we had MnDOT leading it, then we could do that in more places in the state.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when people think about the I-94 project between the two downtowns, or even getting BRT south of downtown, which tragically we had to do in the context of a highway expansion project, because at the time we weren't as strong a coalition as we are now.
Right.
But
and it shows, because the Orange Line like goes very quickly in the sections where that reconstruction happened, and then south of that, it has to exit and go to a station and then get back on, and it's like,
That's right. And that project took 20 years.
Oh boy.
And threats of lawsuits and all this crazy stuff. And part of it is because everybody was debating the color of money. Well, is that a dollar you can use for a transit station, or is that a dollar you can only use for a retaining wall next to a transit station? Oh my God, stop, you're killing me.
Yeah.
Just build good things.
Yeah.
And MnDOT, to their credit, is finally asking for the flexibility to build good things. And we should be helping them. But Republicans don't want to help them. They have a really narrow view, and frankly, some Democrats have a really narrow view, that the Constitution says, and this is wrong, the Constitution doesn't say they can only use dollars for steel, concrete, and roads and retaining walls.
Right.
It actually says highway purpose.
Yeah.
And highway purpose can include helping people in a highway travel shed get where they're going. I mean, we use highway dollars for all kinds of things. Those little vehicles that come, deal with accidents are paid for with highway trunk highway dollars. So it's not a constitutional problem. It's a political problem. And we're trying to build support to say, let's help MnDOT obey the law. It will also make a difference on every project. Think about all the fights that communities have had over highway projects. It's happening right now between the two downtowns. It's happening in Brooklyn Center over Highway 252. MnDOT comes to the community and says, what do you want? And the community says, we don't want a wider highway.
Yeah.
We want transit. We want different ways to get around. And
MnDOT says, hey, what about a wider highway?
Yeah, and they say, sorry, we can't fund the thing you want. We can only fund a wider highway. Well, why did you ask the question then about what do we want? If the only answer is more highway, then cut it out.
Yeah.
Ask a real question and get a real answer. So
okay,
let's
so to clarify, like this year, our legislative agenda is passing some laws that allow MnDOT to do that, but how? What's the mechanism?
Let me be a little less grandiose. Right now, we want to protect the climate impact of highways law, and there are Republicans who are blaming every problem under the sun. If the cost of a project goes up by $10, they say, what's the climate impact of highways law? It's ridiculous. Our near-term goal is to defend the climate impact of highways law from these ridiculous Republican attacks claiming that it's raising costs. That's not true. Ultimately, the climate impact of highways law is actually going to save us a lot of money because we're going to build more efficient infrastructure.
Right.
We also want to lay the groundwork by reminding people that we need to give MnDOT the flexibility to obey the law, the flexibility to build good projects. Because we're playing so much defense, I don't know how much time we're going to be able to put into that, but we are having those conversations. This will fundamentally change how each individual project is dealt with by MnDOT and by the community. If the community around Highway 252, if the community around Interstate 94, if any community dealing with MnDOT is told by MnDOT, we can't pay for anything good, that corrupts every process over every project. Imagine how different it will be after we have given MnDOT flexibility to spend money on good things. It won't just change how they behave, it will change every community conversation, because the community will be able to say, no, you can pay for what we want. You don't have to do this color of money problem where, oh, I'm sorry, we can't pay for that. Met Council has to pay for that. No, they can just pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And we will be so much more powerful.
And MnDOT is where the big money is.
MnDOT is where the big money is.
Right.
It's ultimately not about, I think some legislators think it's about, well, you just want more money for transit. We want to change the conversation. We want to empower communities to get what they want from MnDOT and for MnDOT to be able to say yes.
Yeah.
So that is what we're doing on that side of defending the 2023 win. Building on the climate impact of highways, making it be something that works for MnDOT, works for our goals, and works for individual communities trying to design projects that work for them. But the biggest fight of all is the fight over transit dollars.
Okay.
And if you want to talk about that, we can go to that next.
No, for sure. Yeah. I mean, that's like the big shocker this year was when all of a sudden Governor Walz like proposed huge cuts to the budgets of, was it just Metro Transit or is it like transit agencies statewide?
Oh, it's just Metro Transit.
Great. That makes me feel great.
Well, and frankly, this is, let's just talk about governance for a second. When people wonder, hey, you nerds, Peter, Sam Rockwell, Alyssa, why do you always talk about governance reform so much? Because in my entire life, the Met Council has been an afterthought for governors. And that's a problem because the governor appoints every member of the Metropolitan Council.
Right. It is such a bizarro world seeing Charlie Zelle having to like toe, not the party line, but the governor's line.
Yeah.
And being like, yeah, I want less money. Which like if he was an elected official, he would never say that.
No, never. If the Met Council was accountable to voters in the metropolitan area, we would not be having this problem.
Right.
But because the Met Council is reactive to one and only one person, a governor who's elected by statewide voters, we have this problem all the time for my entire career. And by the way, you said, is it only Metro Transit? Let me be really specific with your listeners. We looked at every transit system in the state of Minnesota that is running fixed route transit. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about dial-a-ride. I'm talking about fixed route transit.
Yep.
That's Mankato, St. Cloud, Rochester, Duluth, Moorhead, Fargo-Moorhead area, and Winona.
Okay.
In every single one of those communities, the transit agency is responsive and accountable only to local elected officials. So why is it that the biggest and most important transit system doesn't have that same protection of being accountable to local elected officials in the metropolitan area? It's a problem.
Yeah.
And so we have...
That's a great way of framing it that I've never heard before.
we brought it to the legislature last year, and we were supporting Frank Hornstein and Scott Dibble's efforts to reform the Met Council because we keep running into problems like this.
Yeah.
So how did we get here? We got to remind people, and this is what we were talking about earlier tonight. What we were talking about earlier tonight is let's remember how we passed this historic 2023 transportation bill with the climate impact of highways law, with this historic funding for transit that I've wanted my entire life. That we've been working for decades. It passed because of champions in the Minnesota legislature. It had virtually nothing to do with Governor Walz.
Right.
He never proposed a 3/4 cent Metro-wide sales tax in the first place. He posed a dinky little 1/8 of a cent Metro sales tax, which would have barely filled Metro Transit's operating deficit.
Right.
But that wasn't our goal. Our goal wasn't to maintain the transit system. Our goal is to reduce vehicle miles traveled, promote climate and equity, and expand the bus rapid transit system throughout the metro area. Yep. So the legislature made that happen. So the governor...
And we made it happen by building a coalition that was metro-wide, not just in the core, but suburbs as well.
Absolutely. We had... One of the best things that's changed in my lifetime is seeing suburban Democrats stand up for transit. Suburban Democrats like Larry Kraft, who is here tonight, like Senator Lindsey Port from Burnsville.
And if we promise them highway BRT lines, that we will be able to spin up with this new money, and then suddenly next year, take away the other, the pot of money that we traditionally rely on for transit, we're not going to be able to deliver on those promises.
Oh, absolutely. If these proposals, either the cut from Walz or the cut from House Republicans go through, it's not that we're going to stop running buses. It's that it's going to significantly curtail our ability to expand the Metro transit system throughout the metro area, which is what we all fought for, which was promised when they signed the bill in 2023. So So Governor Walz is proposing this, and this is what I was telling people tonight. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening at the Capitol right now, and it seems like all of these things could happen. The good news is most of these crazy bills are not going to happen. The House Republicans are performing. They're putting on a show for their donors and their delegates. But this cut to Metro, transit, walking, and biking, and it really is all three, because it's a cut to Met Council, and the Metro-wide sales tax is supposed to pay for transit, walking, and biking. That's a real threat, because it's not just the Republicans pushing it, it's Walz pushing it. And frankly, this is a part of an alarming trend from Walz. He's not just undermining this, he's undermining the 100% clean energy law at the same time. We weren't really talking about this last year, frankly, because Walz was running for vice president.
Sure.
And now that that's over, we need to just elevate the people who are really doing the work.
Yeah.
That's Sierra Club's strategy. Elevate the people who are doing the work, which is our legislative champions.
So where the heck are these like proposed budget cuts coming from? Why do we have a deficit all of a sudden?
Yeah.
What's going on?
So some of the social services are costing more money than was originally predicted.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that's like actuarial tables, right? Like how long people are living. And it may be that some of the things that were proposed in 2023, not in the transit world, not in the transportation world, just cost a little bit more than were expected. But here's the important thing to understand. If a legislator tells you, oh, well, there's a structural budget deficit in the out years, meaning not this year and next year, but in the future, therefore we need to cut services, wrong answer. That's not how this works. It's true that they need to reduce expenditures, but expenditures have multiple forms.
Mm-hmm.
Services is one thing you could cut. Another thing they could do is cut tax expenditures, which is corporate welfare. And that's what we were talking about earlier tonight. It's hard to believe that people could be this clueless in the context of Elon Musk and his tech bros trying to dismantle democracy in America. But believe it or not, there are serious proposals right now to increase and make perpetual a tax credit for data centers owned by Amazon and Microsoft and Google, a tax credit that was originally projected to cost the state of Minnesota $4.7 million a year, is now costing the state of Minnesota $110 million a year. And it's projected to rise as more data centers come online for AI and cryptocurrency and meme coins and all this crazy bullshit. They actually want to give corporate welfare to oligarchs with invitations to inaugurations. The worst, wealthiest people on the planet want tax dollars. This is a direct trade-off with transit, Ian.
Yeah.
If they would actually curtail the greed of these corporations, we wouldn't have to cut transit one penny. And there's other examples. One of the same senators who wants to give a tax credit to data centers, to Microsoft and Google and Amazon, wants to give a bigger tax credit to big ag and ethanol. Mm-hmm. Ethanol has the longest proven track record of failing to meet any carbon reduction goals. Mm-hmm. I mean, the number of, quote, advanced biofuels under the renewable fuel standard was zero. Yeah. 0 gallons year after year. We're going to shovel more money at them at the expense of transit? This is crazy. Sierra Club right now is part of a broad coalition of organizations, not just environmental organizations, who testified earlier today and are going to keep testifying, to make legislators make a choice, to shine a light on all this corporate welfare, to say, you don't actually have to make any of these cuts to services. You don't have to cut transit one penny. You just have to not feed the greed of these oligarchs, and then transit will be fine. And I recommend to all your listeners that they engage with their legislator. If you have a legislator who says, oh, well, we need to cut something, we're going to show them a real menu of things they can cut. Start with tax credit for data centers, start with tax credits for ethanol, and there'll be more to come.
Nice.
A successful transit system has big LRT lines and also a lot of connecting bus service. And the proposal to kill the Bottineau BRT line is also out there, and it's a pretty stupid proposal.
We haven't even talked about North Star.
Yes. Well, North Star is a more complicated topic. Let's focus on Bottineau. Bottineau LRT runs through Golden Valley, New Hope, Crystal, Robbinsdale.
Sure.
And any of your listeners...
That's my favorite suburb.
Anybody who lives in those communities should speak up for Botno LRT.
Yeah.
They should also speak up for the bus funding, which is the most threatened, because we want Southwest and Botno to be successful. And the way people use transit has changed. Fewer people are going to and from downtown for peak hour service. But these projects can still be successful if they're part of an integrated network. And it just so happens that the same senator who's pushing the data centers tax credit represents the Botno LRT line.
Hey.
Well, do we want that? So if you're in New Hope, Crystal, Robbinsdale, you got to speak up for no cuts to Botno, but also no cuts to bus transit. Because Southwest and Botno need connecting bus service to be successful.
How many of these data centers are in New Hope, Crystal, Robbinsdale?
Oh, they're not.
Exactly.
They're not. And there are no cornfields in White Bear Lake. I'd much rather be putting money into clean energy manufacturing, transit, things that employ people on a permanent, ongoing basis.
Nice.
So if you live in those suburbs, you really need to speak up.
Sweet. Peter, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Ian. Love talking to you.
And finally, I sat down with Erik Noonan, Communications Manager at the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota, during their Day on the Hill.
Yeah, so 23 was really the year that we were able to accomplish a lot of stuff. It was our dream list of things that we thought were maybe right at the edge of what was possible. That resulted in us kind of going back to the table and saying, okay, well, what is that next phase really of our organization? It lined up with the new executive director, Michael Wojcik, taking over that role and us reimagining kind of, well, how do we have this be kind of grassroots driven? We did out some membership polling. A lot of that pointed to that the needs are really local level, but the state level needs, they still exist, and they're pretty big.
Right. And how can the state level stuff support those local needs?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And that's for people who aren't as familiar with the Bicycle Alliance, I would say that the way that we are truly different than the other transportation nonprofits is that we have a bigger presence outside the metro than we do in the metro. We have 13 chapters around the state. So if you are wanting to talk to people who want to see bike ped or transit get better in Duluth or Rochester or really, small communities too, Willmar, Minnesota or Fergus Falls, that's us. That's our organization.
One frustration from last year that I remember was the e-bike rebates process. Once it actually happened, people were not very happy with the results. So what are we doing to address that this year?
Yeah, I would say that it's not even just to some people. I don't know of anyone who's like, yeah, that was
great.
Well done. I will say that, subtly, and we try to keep this close to the chest, I think there's a point of pride that there was enough demand for this program, despite how small it was, around the state that we crashed a Salesforce server. And that's, my understanding, is not easy to do.
Right.
So robust demand.
That's Minnesota exceptionalism for you right there.
Minnesota exceptionalism. Someone tell McKnight. It was not the best rollout that I've ever seen of any program anyone's ever done.
Right.
And I think that that's acknowledged by our state government.
And not throwing shade at the Department of Revenue or anybody.
They were really busy rolling out weed too, which a shout out to that recent episode.
But they were constrained in a lot of ways by the wording in the actual law. We're addressing some of those issues.
Yeah. And I think that especially for listeners, what I try to reinforce is the bill that made it through at the end is different than the bill when it was first introduced. The intention of the original bill was very much that this is something that would go towards helping people who did not otherwise have the financial means to purchase an e-bike that was good quality, that was safe, and that would facilitate them having that transportation option.
Right.
And that, in addition to, again, the Salesforce server crashing and the frustration about that initial rollout, is when you look at the kind of the results of that equity component, it didn't make it through the way that it should have. And that's really disappointing to see that kind of the people who were intended to have it be helped, to be helped by it, that didn't make it to them. And there's a number of reasons why that happened, but definitely one of those is it was available to first come, first serve on a Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. In the middle of the summer. And it's there's a certain type of person who has the flexibility in their schedule to be able to be online and have a reliable connection at that time of day. And that, that Venn diagram overlap is not as big with the people who need that transportation as you'd maybe want it to be. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to address this year. And what we're starting with on that is shifting to a lottery system, which I think many people looking at that, especially given the fallout of it, it makes a ton of sense. Is why did we try to have people line up all at the same time, and whoever had the best internet connection had a chance at maybe getting this very small number of rebates. And I think that that's the other part of it, is that people were excited about this. My understanding is there were around 60,000 people simultaneously trying to get onto the Department of Revenue's website at the same time, hence it accidentally facilitated a DDoS attack. But the demand far outstripped the capacity, even had this rollout been flawless.
Sure. Because
we're talking about 3,000 and some change number of people who were able to get this money. And there's a great SRF Consulting put together this great one-pager about how just pie in the sky idea. If we had actually funded this robustly in a way that would mean that anyone who wanted this rebate could get it, similar to how we do for electric cars. The cost to be able to provide that to, again, just everyone who is simultaneously online, so that roughly 60,000 people, it would cost less than a freeway interchange, and it would facilitate half the state's greenhouse gas emission reductions essentially overnight.
Right.
And that was a very conservative estimate based on other states that have done a rebate program. And it's one of those things where it's like, why are we not doing this? Well, the funding doesn't always work that way. So there's some bills that we're working on this year around that as well, the way that we fund transportation. But for the e-bike rebate bill, the things that are currently in play as we talk right now on February 27th is that it's hopefully going to be switched to a lottery system, and that there's also going to be robust tracking behind it. And so that tracking component is really important to us, making the case that this is something that we should try to do again. Again, we're coming into the second year of this rebate being available, and it's not a lot of money. We're talking about a couple $2 million here. But we're making the case for, what if there was a pot of money that was just every year it was replenished in the same way that we did, electric vehicle car subsidies.
Is the electric vehicle thing, is that a federal level or is that state level?
That's a good question. I don't know that Minnesota ever did a state level one.
Okay.
But there's some other subsidies around that are not pertinent maybe to the electric vehicle itself. But I believe there's some IRA funding that is applicable to home charging and the voltage upgrades, that kind of stuff. But maybe we can bring Peter Wagenius back on here and probably answer those questions for you. But yeah, it was by far the highest profile bike anything that happened in 2024, and it was a frustrating rollout for everyone.
Oh yeah.
We can talk about the bills that we are putting through here.
Yeah, absolutely.
First off, the state of Minnesota is responsible for Safe Routes to School as a program existing nationwide. It had stopped existing. Then Jim Oberstar, representative for the state of Minnesota, was institutional in getting that to happen federally because it had been so successful here in the state of Minnesota. The way that the funding structure for that works is that the state of Minnesota funds that at a level of $500,000 a year, which is a lot if you're talking about an individual income. But when you're talking about statewide funding of anything, you're talking about that's a traffic light maybe.
Right.
And so every year we come and we say, hey, this is a really successful program. The Department of Health likes this, the Department of Education like this, parents like this, everyone likes this. And so we get many times that number, but we have to keep coming and asking for it. And
it's just one Safe Routes to School funding. How much could it cost?
Exactly. Well, more than $500,000 is the answer, Ian. And that it hinders a lot of the efforts involved with that, because you're talking about staff members who are looking at this as, okay, well, I have this position for 2 years, but then it might go away depending on if Bike Man is able to ask for enough money next time. And so we are hopefully this year going to be bumping that number up to a level of reality of what that's actually costing around the state to facilitate. And so we have a number of bills that are currently making their way through. Right. But right now what we're looking at is somewhere between $10 and $20 million as the annualized number. What this funding means is that it's not just the wealthy school districts that have the bandwidth to apply for the grants to make this stuff happen is that when there is a larger pool of money, it means that the smaller school districts, the maybe less financially well-off school districts, they're still going to benefit from more kids being able to get to school safely on their own. And that is the goal, is that's something that we hope to spread. And I guess on that note, too, what I kind of harken back to one of the things that we accomplished in 2023 was that mandate around bike education in schools. So we got that through, which is excellent. First state in the nation to do that, is my understanding. And the reality of that one is we're not at 100% of kids getting this education yet. We're still sitting around 30-40%.
Oh, my God.
And a lot of that is this awareness between kind of the state level agencies and when you get actually down to the school districts. Right. But what this mandate means is that if you're a school teacher, if you're a parent, this exists. And you can say, hey, why aren't we doing this yet? It's mandated. And you kind of have that gravitas, that energy behind it to be able to say that this is something that needs to happen.
I remember in years past, we were trying to get, like, speed limit lowerings near schools, right? Regardless of, like, state highway, county road status and stuff like that. Did we win that, or is that still something we're working on?
It's in play right now.
Okay.
So that what it's going to look like is that's the new design standard. Is when a new school is built or when a road is redone. That again, somebody can point to this and be like, this needs to be a roadway that is safe for kids to cross.
Right. Decriminalizing jaywalking.
Surprisingly, to me at least, we now have bipartisan support for it.
Nice.
I think it's kind of under that idea that, like, we have laws in the books that are dumb.
Yeah.
And it's okay to look at those and have, fresh eyes on them and be like, does this make sense in the context of, this year of our Lord 2025?
Honestly,
jaywalking doesn't.
Until I saw it on the list of things that we were advocating for this year, I had assumed that jaywalking was not a criminal offense, that it was just like, oh, if I'm crossing mid-block, like, I don't have the right of way. I'm still allowed to do it if there are no cars coming, but like the common sense understanding of that scenario is like does not align up with the way
lived experience of anyone. Like,
right.
You're a car driver. You park on one side of the street. Are you going to go down to the crosswalk to get to the restaurant that's directly across the street? No, you're going to wait for the traffic to cross, and then you're going to cross mid-block.
Right.
And that's you deciding what is the safest option for you.
Yeah.
And statistically in the state of Minnesota, we actually score really poorly at safety at intersections where we are telling pedestrians currently that they are required to cross, or else they might face criminal prosecution. And it's like, this is insanity. This is a dumb thing that we're doing right now, and we don't have to do it that way.
Yeah, as long as we don't have the word practicable written into it.
We are trying to get away from that one, and that's a great segue into the. Also in 23, we passed one half of the Idaho stop.
Yep.
And so with this one, we're saying, hey, if you're on a bike at a red light, you're very vulnerable. If somebody doesn't see you, or they're looking for the light to change and they're not paying attention that there's a small person on a bicycle in front of them, they very well might rear end you. And it's also the fact that, like, when you're on a bike, you're safest when you're in motion because you're able to determine your movement, which is not true when you're at a dead stop. So you're ready to talk about the Inspector General. I think that's the other big piece of of legislation that we're working on this year. And so I guess I'll start by talking about what an Inspector General is. An Inspector General is internal to an organization, but they're essentially self-policing. It's saying, hey, are we doing things in the right way? Are we doing things per the letter of the law and our mandates, and making sure that those laws that we passed in 23 and 24, and before that and after, that we're building roadway projects such that when we build a road next to a school, assuming we pass this law, that it's being built at a design standard that means that people are going to drive 15 miles an hour. The unfortunate reality is that the central office is sometimes good at this.
Central office of MnDOT.
MnDOT, yeah. And as soon as you get out into the districts, there's a lot of people that don't. That information hasn't made it out there, that, like, we have a statewide VMT reduction mandate, or that when they're designing a project that involves bike or pedestrian facilities, that they can't just cut that right away. That needs to make it into the kind of the finalized form of that design options before they even talk about, is this something that's necessary within the context of this project? And those aren't happening, unfortunately, yet. And we're tracking on a number of projects across the state. that are like that. One that is particularly relevant to my boss, Michael, is the busiest intersection in Rochester, and that is being redone here in a couple of years, and they've not done a good job of not adding roadway capacity to the busiest intersection and the third largest city in the state, and the bike ped facilities on that are pretty trash, and it's resulting in all sorts of ramifications for that city being able to expand transit services and accessibility to places like the farmers market down there and the shopping mall and areas that are supposed to be transit oriented but are going to stay as drive-throughs unless this intersection is done correctly. And this intersection should have been done correctly. So again, we're trying to make sure that there's a voice inside of MnDOT with the authority to say, this project needs to halt until we do it correctly. And this is kind of tying on to a bigger conversation that is very popular, especially with the Republicans right now, is these officers and inspector general. They're kind of looking at it as like fraud prevention. We would love to have the conversation be about kind of, are we spending money in ways that are necessary when it comes to highways? Right. But I think the purpose of this one really is are these design standards being met? And how do we facilitate that? So again, an example of a bill that we've been able to get bipartisan support for, and we're really hopeful. And also a bill, I believe currently we have 6 different bills going through that are some variation of this one. But we hope in the coming weeks that'll consolidate down into to one finalized version that'll make it through all the different committees in time by June.
Honestly, the like version control on the state legislative website, like it impresses me just as much as like GitHub does.
if only, we need more educators on how to successfully use versioning. My colleague CJ and I last night at 9 p.m. we're still sorting through kind of as new bills were coming in that had been made it through the revisor's office yesterday. So we have our work cut out for us as we look at the finish line for this legislative session. But we are really optimistic on the majority of these, and we believe that we'll really be successful in shifting the conversation and also in achieving a lot of these goals. And again, these goals were ones that were set from the surveys that we sent out to our membership. These were all ideas that came in through that. Right. Yeah.
Which is why most of them like feel like just common sense things, right?
100%. Yeah. It's the kind of thing that you wonder why it didn't happen before.
Right.
Like jaywalking.
Exactly. Awesome. Erik, thanks for coming on the show.
Very happy to be here.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Streets.mn podcast. The show is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Non-Derivative license, so feel free to republish the episode as long as you are not altering it and you are not profiting from it. The music in this episode is by Eric Brandt and the Urban Hillbilly Quartet. This episode was hosted and edited by me, Ian R. Buck, and was transcribed by Stina Neel. We're always looking to feature new voices on the Streets.mn podcast, so if you have ideas for future episodes, drop us a line at podcast@streets.mn. Streets.mn is a community blog and podcast and relies on contributions from audience members like you. If you can make a one-time or recurring donation, you can find more information about doing so at streets.mn/donate. Find other listeners and discuss this episode on your favorite social media platform using the hashtag StreetsMNPodcast. Until next time, take care.